The concept of cyberpunk in our culture has become so ingrained that it would be difficult to find a media where it didn't dominate at some point in history. Whether it was the books, the William Gibson's Neuromancer, the Walter John Williams Hardwired, or of course the RPGs for tabletop. Then there's the movies like The Matrix and the RoboCop films, and of course Blade Runner. Not to mention anime like Akira, Ghost in the Shell, Armitage, and Battle Angel Alita, to name a few. It was obvious that video games were going to follow suit, and they did. Cyberpunk 2077, whether you liked it or hated it, was unignorable. And with Keanu Reeves frontmanning the entire thing, it was definitely going to be something that was talked about. With the new Netflix series Edgerunners coming through, is it worth watching? Stay tuned. Welcome back to Alcohol and Anime Night, the show that gets you drunker, the show that gets you fatter, and the show that makes you spill beer all over your shirt when you don't spin the boot. We are celebrating Oktoberfest still, so if you didn't see the REM unboxing, our Oktoberfest REM, which is right there, check up here. It's a little fun figure, my first anime figure. And tonight we're also checking out a Oktoberfest beer that is worth checking out. I'm drinking it out of a traditional boot like a gentleman. Tonight, we are talking about a show that we previewed back at the beginning of the year that we were looking forward to. It was on my top 10 anime for 2022. Again, check it out here if you didn't check that out already. There's still a few more that haven't released yet this year. And that show, of course, is Cyberpunk Edgerunners, done by Trigger, done by Netflix, and done by CD Projekt Red. What an incredible trinity to get together to do this. Now, this anime comes right on the heels of the Witcher anime, which is quite good. I do recommend that as well. We haven't done a review on it yet. But in the same vein, it carries the entire feel and style of the games and the television show, for that matter, the Netflix show, I guess, all into the anime. So, if you haven't watched that, I definitely recommend that one as well. But today we are here to talk about Cyberpunk Edgerunners. Is it worth watching? Spoiler, yes, it is. Now, with a caveat, I will add a caveat. If you are a fan of the genre of Cyberpunk in general, and or you've played the RPG game, the old school tabletop game, or of course the Cyberpunk 2077 video game, which I happen to adore, I really liked that game, then you are really going to like this. Why? Well, for the most part, it's because it seamlessly integrates music, themes, and characters from the games, and they did deep pulls even in like the source books, like from the original RPGs, to get things into this anime that you are really going to like. I think longtime Cyberpunk OGs are still going to dig this because there's things that they're going to pull deep into that old source book material. The story centers around a street kid named David Martinez, and he is just kind of the typical losery kid that's going to a school that's better than he is. He's like the poor kid that's allowed to come to like the nice school. Anyway, he doesn't have a lot of money. His mom's kind of struggling to make ends meet. Yada, yada, yada. Now, I want to pause here to say I'm going to do my absolute best to not spoil anything here because there are so many spoilers online. If you are interested in this show, you'll be dodging them, trying to not see the spoilers. I urge you not to go online and search anything. It will ruin the show for you. So just watch it, power through it, and we'll talk afterwards. We'll have a beer afterwards because we're gonna have some feels, and that's one thing that Netflix, Trigger, and CD Projekt Red does. Man, they get you in the feels on this one, and that's why I really recommend it so much. Now, there are several characters throughout this entire series, and I'm not going to get into them really because part of the fun of the series is actually discovering these characters. But our protagonist starts out as kind of the like a level 1 character, which is fun because that's almost like the game. Like you start out like just with nothing, and kind of levels up through this entire thing. Kind of quickly, it's like he's doing a speed run, but It is fun to see that progression, and the characters do kind of change like that. One thing to note, of course, Studio Trigger, always killing it, no exception here. The colors, the textures, the style in animation really gives you a feel for the very fast movements that sometimes happen, and the things like accessing a computer program that should be kind of boring, they really make animated in a way that's interesting. One thing about the show, a negative, if I could portray both positives and negatives, is it does take a couple of episodes to get rolling. Episode number 1 is not what I'd call a grabber. It does open with a pretty good action scene, but without the context behind it, it doesn't necessarily grab you, and without knowing who's involved and everything like that. So I will say it takes a couple of episodes to get invested. This is one I almost recommend you binge within either like a night or 2 nights, because you kind of want to get the cumulative effect. And I know sometimes people like to watch a show over a week, and I did that. I kind of watched it one episode over, and I eventually realized it was better to watch 2-3 episodes at once. So I rarely say that because sometimes I actually like stretching something out. This one, I kind of recommend just powering through the whole thing, and I think you'll have maybe a better experience and avoid some of those spoilers, for God's sakes. Oh my gosh, there's so many out there. The show also probably could have been, rather than 10 episodes, it probably could have been 12 episodes to really get in a little deeper and flesh those characters out more. I know it's a money-saving type things nowadays to do a 10-episode show, but I do think this could have benefited from a 12-episode show. I also hope that this is just the beginning of the cyberpunk world, and I hope that we see even more of these series that focus on a small portion of the cyberpunk world. There's just so much out there. Another thing I will say is a negative about this show is it does rely quite heavily on your prior knowledge of either the game, be it the video game or the role-playing game. So there are several concepts within there, like the cyberware concept, the idea of the Ripper Docs, the chips within their necks, you know, the mind kind of computers, the decks, I guess they were called. All of that, they kind of skip right past it. Now, I personally like that, because unlike every Spider-Man movie ever, where they kind of have to tell you the origin from the beginning, this kind of throws you into it. And if you're not familiar with the world, you kind of have to play catch-up quickly. If you are familiar, you're like, cool, let's roll. We're good. I got you. I know where we're going. And so I like the idea that we don't have to build everything from the ground up. They can just throw you right into it. You are going to notice several locations, several pieces of music. Namely, I Really Want to Stay the Night. That song was my favorite song from the game, and it is used in this series to excellent effect. I am not kidding you when I tell you there are moments when I almost teared up, because just the emotion of that song in that moment really just hit, and they knew what they were doing. This anime is available in both English and Japanese. I'll be honest, I don't know which one to recommend. For me, I played the Cyberpunk game in English for the most part, and so it feels natural for it to be in English, but I actually like the voice actors from the Japanese version better. So I don't know which one to recommend to you. Give them both a shot, but I will say sometimes reading the subtitles can take away from viewing the beautiful animation. So that's something to consider. One character I really want to highlight, and that seems to be at this point universally accepted, is the character Rebecca. Rebecca is by far the coolest character in the entire series, and best girl. Best girl for sure. I could have watched an entire series of just Rebecca, and I hope that you guys have the same experience as well. She's a very bombastic, almost Harley Quinn-like character. Believe it or not, that character, based on some of the interviews of the creators, almost didn't make it into the series, but was kind of force-fed in, and I can't imagine what it would have been like without her. Frankly, I'm not sure I would have liked it, I'll be honest. So it is interesting how choices like that artistically can very much affect your enjoyment of an anime just by how the characters are in there. To go along with the Cyberpunk Edgerunners release, there was a massive update to the game. I want to say it's several gigabytes. I want to say like 40 gigabytes or something like that of extra content that was not only updates and patches, but things that integrate some of the Cyberpunk Edgerunners content into the game. Namely, some of the weapons that you see there, including Rebecca's shotgun that's in there and her awesome machine gun. So find those. They're easy to find. Just don't spoil anything for yourself online yet. You are going to be very disappointed if you do that. There's a really great moral and a really great theme in this show, and it's a theme that I believe kind of is cohesive throughout all of the cyberpunk properties that are within that. And that concept is, no matter how much technology, neon lights, chrome, cybernetics, computer programs, no matter how much of that exists, it cannot replace the human interactions, the interpersonal reactions. And when those are taken away, there's nothing that can replace it. And we find ourselves much more willing to give up any of that stuff if it means that we can have that personal connection. It's almost unusual in our modern age to hear that kind of moral that says step away from technology and step towards personal relationships, and don't ignore the relationships that are right in front of you, and do what you can to preserve those relationships. So there's so much more. It goes so deep, and I don't want to spoil anything for you, so I'm going to try and keep this episode short. Again, I hope you are celebrating Oktoberfest. I know I am. So thank you so much for joining me for this episode. Go out there and play the Cyberpunk 2077 game, and until next time, Kampai, Prost! It's the bubble. It's the bubble. I spilled it all over myself.